The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard as Thomas McKenna stepped out of his barn, his heart hammering against his ribs. 200 Lakota warriors sat motionless on their painted horses, forming a perfect semicircle around his homestead. The silence was so complete he could hear the leather creaking on their war ponies and the soft whisper of feathers in the prairie wind. At the center of the formation sat a man Thomas recognized, Chief Running Bear, his weathered face painted with the sacred colors of his people. The chief's dark eyes held no malice, only a deep, penetrating wisdom that seemed to see straight through to Thomas's soul. "Thomas McKenna," the chief spoke, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "You saved my grandson's life." Thomas swallowed, hard remembering the skeletal little boy he'd found collapsed by his water trough just yesterday. The child had been barely alive, his lips cracked and bleeding, his small body racked with fever. Thomas hadn't hesitated. He'd carried the boy inside, fed him warm broth, and tended to him through the night like his own son. "Any decent man would have done the same," Thomas replied, his voice steady, despite the fear coursing through his veins. Running Bear dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and graceful. As he approached, Thomas noticed something that made his breath catch. Pinned to the chief's buckskin shirt was a small silver locket, one Thomas recognized all too well. "You know this?" the chief asked, following Thomas's gaze to the locket. Thomas's hand instinctively moved to his chest, where beneath his worn cotton shirt lay a matching chain, now for 3 long years. "Where did you get that?" "From my daughter," Running Bear said simply. "The woman you call Sarah." The world seemed to tilt beneath Thomas's feet. Sarah, his Sarah, the woman who had vanished from his life like morning mist, leaving only a hastily scrawled note about duty and honor and impossible choices. He'd searched for her for months, riding from town to town, following every whisper and rumor, until the trail went cold somewhere in the Badlands. "Sarah is your daughter?" Thomas whispered. "She is. And she speaks of you often." The chief's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "She says you are a good man with a wounded heart." Thomas felt his knees threaten to buckle. Is she? Is she alive? Is she well? She lives, but she is not well." Running Bear gestured toward the assembled warriors. "We have come not for war, Thomas McKenna, but because my daughter is dying, and she has asked for you." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. Farah, his beloved Sarah, with her laughing green eyes and hair like spun gold, was dying. The woman who had taught him that love could be both the sweetest heaven and the cruelest hell was slipping away from this world, and she had asked for him. "Take me to her," Thomas said without hesitation. "Please." Running Bear studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Gather what you need. We ride within the hour." As Thomas hurried back into his cabin, his mind raced with memories of Sarah. They had met 3 years ago at the spring dance in Laramie. She'd been visiting her aunt, or so she'd said, a beautiful, mysterious woman who spoke with a slight accent he couldn't quite place. They danced until dawn, and by the time the sun painted the sky pink and gold, Thomas knew he'd found the other half of his soul. For 6 glorious months, they'd courted in secret. Sarah would ride out from town to meet him by the old cottonwood tree near the creek. They'd talk for hours about their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Thomas had carved their initials into that tree trunk and promised her a life filled with love and laughter. Then one morning, she was gone, just gone, like she'd never existed at all. The only trace left behind was a letter that had torn his heart clean in two. "My dearest Thomas, by the time you read this, I will be far away. Please don't try to find me. What we had was beautiful, but it cannot be. I am not who you think I am, and staying would only bring you pain. Know that I love you more than the stars love the night sky, but sometimes love isn't enough. Forever yours in spirit." Sarah had read that letter 1,000 times, memorizing every curve of her handwriting, every tear stain that had smudged the ink. He'd kept it pressed between the pages of his Bible, the closest thing to a prayer he had left now as he packed his saddlebags with trembling hands. Thomas understood why she'd left. Sarah wasn't just any woman. She was Running Bear's daughter, a Lakota princess caught between two worlds. Their love had been forbidden from the start, doomed by the color of their skin and the hatred that poisoned the hearts of men on both sides of the frontier. But none of that mattered now. Sarah was dying, and she'd asked for him. He would ride through hell itself to reach her side. The journey to the Lakota camp took 2 days of hard riding across the endless prairie. Thomas rode beside Chief Running Bear, surrounded by the silent warriors who had become his strange guardians rather than his captors. They spoke little during the long miles, but occasionally the chief would share fragments of Sarah's story. She had been born to a Lakota mother and raised in the traditions of the people. But when she was 12, her mother had died of smallpox, and Running Bear had sent her east to be educated in the white man's schools, hoping she might one day serve as a bridge between their worlds. "She learned your language, your customs," Running Bear explained as they watered their horses by a crystal stream. "But her heart remained Lakota. When she returned to us, she was caught between two lives, belonging fully to neither." "Why did she come to Laramie?" Thomas asked. "To see the world she had studied but never truly known? To understand the people she might one day help her own people make peace with." The chief's dark eyes found Thomas's. She was not supposed to fall in. Love. Thomas felt a familiar ache in his chest. "Neither was I." "Love recognizes no boundaries," Running Bear said quietly. "But the world does. My daughter knew this. She left you to spare you the hatred you would face for loving one of our people. She sacrificed her happiness for your safety." "I never asked." "Her too," Thomas said fiercely. "I would have faced anything for her, I know. That is why she knew she had to leave." They rode in silence after that, each man lost in his own thoughts. Thomas found himself remembering every precious moment he'd shared with Sarah, the way she laughed at his terrible jokes. How she'd taught him to read the patterns in the clouds, the night she'd cried in his arms after a nightmare and whispered that she was afraid of being forgotten. He'd told her that was impossible. He'd promised her that even if the whole world forgot her name, he would remember. He would carry her memory in his heart until his dying day. Now it seemed that day might come sooner than he'd imagined. The Lakota camp materialized out of the prairie like something from a dream. Dozens of tipis dotted the landscape, their painted sides telling stories of hunts and battles and sacred visions. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and children ran between the lodges, their laughter carrying on the wind. But as the war party rode into camp, Thomas noticed the unusual quiet. Women watched from the shadows of their homes, their faces grave. Old men nodded respectfully as Running Bear passed, but their eyes held sorrow. "She is in my lodge," the chief said as they dismounted. "She has been waiting for you." Thomas's legs felt unsteady as he followed Running Bear through the camp. His heart was beating so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. After 3 years of wondering, 3 years of dreaming, he was about to see Sarah again. But not like this. Never like this. The chief's lodge was larger than the others, its sides decorated with intricate paintings of eagles and buffalo and the sacred symbols of his lineage. Running Bear pulled aside the entrance flap and gestured for Thomas to enter. The interior was warm and dim, lit by a small fire that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The air smelled of sage and sweet grass, and something else, something that made Thomas's chest tighten with fear. She was lying on a bed of soft buffalo robes, and for a moment, Thomas forgot how to breathe. Sarah, his Sarah. But oh, how she had changed. The vibrant, laughing woman he remembered had been replaced by a fragile shadow. Her once golden hair hung in thin braids over her shoulders, and her green eyes seemed too large for her gaunt face. She wore a simple doeskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork, and even in her illness, she was the most beautiful thing Thomas had ever seen. "Thomas," she whispered, and her voice was like music from a broken violin. "You came." He was beside her in 3 quick strides, falling to his knees on the soft robes. Up close, he could see the fever burning in her cheeks, the labored rise and fall of her chest. Whatever sickness had claimed her was winning the battle. "Of course I came," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Been looking for you for 3 years, Sarah. I never stopped looking. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Thomas. I'm so sorry for leaving you the way I did. I thought it would be easier if you believed I didn't love you. But I never believed that, Thomas said, reaching out to touch her face with trembling fingers. Not for a single day. I knew you loved me. I just couldn't understand why that wasn't enough, because I was a coward, Sarah whispered. I was afraid of what loving you would cost both of us. The world wasn't ready for us, Thomas. It still isn't. I don't care about the world, Thomas said fiercely. I only care about you. I've loved you every day for 3 years, Sarah. I'll love you for 300 more if you'll let me. She closed her eyes, fresh tears leaking from beneath her lashes. It's too late, my love. I'm dying. No. The word came out as a growl. No, you're not. We'll find a doctor. Well, Thomas. Her hand found his, so thin and fragile, he was afraid he might break it. Listen to me. I need to tell you things. Important things. He wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the unfairness of finding her again, only to lose her. But the urgency in her voice stopped him. Tell me, he said. Sarah struggled to sit up, and Thomas helped her, arranging the buffalo robes behind her back. When she was comfortable, she looked directly into his eyes. Do you remember the night before I left? When we talked about the future. Thomas nodded. How could he forget? They'd been lying under the stars by their favorite spot near the creek. Sarah had seemed distant, troubled, but when he'd asked her what was wrong, she'd only smiled and said she was thinking about tomorrow. I was already pregnant, she whispered. The world stopped spinning. Thomas felt like he'd been struck by lightning, every nerve in his body suddenly alive with electricity. Pregnant.
How with your child, Thomas?
Our son. Our son, the words echoed. In his mind, like thunder, he had a son. A son he'd never known about, never held, never taught to ride or fish or read the wisdom written in the prairie wind. Where is he? Thomas managed to ask through the roar of blood in his ears. Sarah, where's our boy? She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen since entering the lodge. He's here, safe. He's the reason I came back to my people. I couldn't raise a half-breed child in the white world alone. But here among the Lakota, he's loved and accepted. What's his name? I call him Samuel, but his Lakota name is Mato Nagin Standing Bear. Her eyes sparkled with pride and love. He has your eyes, Thomas, your stubborn chin. And he's so smart he speaks both English and Lakota perfectly, and he can already track a rabbit through tall grass. Thomas felt his heart breaking and mending at the same time. He had a Suna, beautiful, brilliant son who carried his blood and Sarah's spirit. But he'd lost 3 years with the boy, 3 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and proud moments that could never be recovered. I want to meet him, Thomas said. I want to know him. Sleeping in my sister's lodge, Sarah said. But Thomas, you need to understand, he doesn't know about you. He thinks his father was a warrior who died before he was born. Want him to feel torn between two worlds the way I always have. The pain in Thomas's chest was almost unbearable. His son didn't even know he existed. Why are you telling me now? Sarah's breathing became more labored, and she had to rest before answering. Because I'm dying and I need to know that Samuel will be taken care of. My father loves him, but the boy needs more than one world can give him. He needs to know where he comes from. What are you asking of me, Sarah? I'm asking you to be his father, to teach him about your world while respecting ours, asking you to love him the way we loved each other completely, without reservation, no matter what the world thinks. Didn't hesitate. Yes, of course. I'll do anything for him. For you, Sarah reached beneath her pillow and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. This is for you, she said, pressing it into his hands. Thomas unwrapped the bundle with careful fingers. Inside was the silver locket he'd given her so long ago, the one that matched his chain. But it wasn't empty. Nestled inside was a tiny lock of golden hair. From when he was a baby, Sarah explained. I've carried it with me every day, along with your locket. I wanted him close to my heart, and I wanted you there too. Thomas closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of love and loss pressing down on him. When he opened them again, Sarah was watching him with an expression of infinite tenderness. "There's something else," she said softly. "Samuel saved his grandfather's life yesterday. He was playing by the river when he saw an old man from a neighboring tribe fall into the water. The man couldn't swim, and the current was strong. Samuel jumped in without thinking and pulled him to shore." Thomas frowned, confused. "I don't understand." The old man was Chief White Hawk, a leader who has been negotiating peace between our tribes and the white settlers. His death would have meant war, terrible war. But because Samuel saved him, White Hawk has agreed to continue the peace talks. My father believes it's a sign from the spirits that our son is meant to be a bridge between our peoples. The pieces suddenly clicked into place in Thomas's mind. "The little boy I found by my water trough yesterday was Samuel," Sarah finished. "He'd been playing too far from camp and got lost. When he finally found water, he was already sick with fever and exhaustion. If you hadn't found him, ... double quotes, Thomas felt dizzy. The child he'd saved, the little boy whose life he'd preserved with warm broth and gentle care, was his own son. His and Sarah's son, the bridge between their worlds that neither of them had dared to dream of. The Spirit's work in mysterious ways," Sarah whispered. "They brought you back into our lives just when we needed you most." "Sarah," Thomas said urgently, "there has to be something we can do. Some medicine, some treatment." "There is nothing," she said firmly. "The sickness has taken hold too deeply. I've made my peace with it, Thomas. Not afraid to die. Only afraid of leaving Samuel and you." "Then marry me," Thomas said suddenly. "Right now, tonight. I don't care what anyone thinks. I don't care about their rules or their hatred. Marry me, Sarah. Let me be your husband for whatever time we have left." Sarah stared at him in shock. "Thomas, that's impossible." "The laws? I don't give a damn about their laws," Thomas said fiercely. "I love you. I've always loved you. If you're going to leave this world, I want it to be as my wife. I want our son to know that his parents were married, that what we had was sacred and real." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Thomas, I want that too." The wedding ceremony took place that very night under a canopy of stars that seemed to shine brighter than any Thomas had ever seen. Chief Running Bear performed the ritual himself, speaking in both Lakota and English so that the spirits of both worlds would hear and bless their union. Sarah wore a dress of white, doeskin decorated with hundreds of tiny blue beads that caught the firelight like captured pieces of sky. Someone had woven wildflowers into her hair, and despite her illness, she looked like an angel descended from heaven. Thomas had never owned anything fancy enough for a wedding, but the women of the tribe had presented him with a shirt of soft buckskin decorated with porcupine quills and painted with symbols of protection and love. He felt honored to wear their gifts, honored to be accepted into their sacred circle. The entire tribe gathered to witness their vows. Warriors who had been ready to fight the white man stood shoulder to shoulder with their families, their faces solemn but approving. Children sat quietly by the fire, their eyes wide with wonder at the ceremony unfolding before them, and in the front row, held in the arms of Sarah's sister, was a little boy with Thomas's eyes, and Sarah smiled at Samuel, their son. When Chief Running Bear asked Thomas to speak his vows, he looked directly at Sarah and spoke from his heart. "Sarah, I promise to love you with every breath in my body, in this life and whatever comes after. I promise to honor your memory and raise our son to be proud of both sides of his heritage. I promise to build bridges where others see only walls, and to choose love over fear every day for the rest of my life." Sarah's voice was weak but clear as she spoke her own vows. "Thomas, I promise to love you beyond death, beyond time, beyond the boundaries that this world tries to put between us. I promise that wherever my spirit goes, it will be watching over you and our son. And I promise that what we have shared will never truly end it, will live on in Samuel, in the love we've planted in this hard ground, in the hope we've given to both our peoples." When Running Bear pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Sarah with all the passion and tenderness of 3 years' worth of separation. The tribe erupted in celebration, but for Thomas, the only sound that mattered was Sarah's whispered, I love you." Against his lips, they had 6 more days together as husband and wife, 6 precious days that Thomas would treasure for the rest of his life. He met Samuel on the 2nd day. Sarah's sister brought the boy to their lodge, introducing Thomas as your mother's friend who helped you when you were lost. Samuel was everything Sarah had described and more. At 3 years old, he was bright and curious and completely fearless. He had Thomas's stubborn jaw and Sarah's expressive eyes, and when he smiled, Thomas felt his heart expand until he thought it might burst from his chest. "You saved me," Samuel said solemnly, looking up at Thomas with those familiar green eyes. "Mother says you gave me food and made me better." "Any father would do the same for his son," Thomas replied, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Samuel tilted his head, puzzled. "But you're not my father. My father was a brave warrior who went to fight the spirits." Thomas glanced at Sarah, who was watching from her bed with tears in her eyes. They had agreed to wait before telling Samuel the truth. The boy was too young to understand the complexities of their situation. "Sometimes," Thomas said carefully, "the spirits send us people to love when we need them most. I may not be your father by blood, but I promise to love you like one for as long as you'll let me." Samuel considered this with the serious expression of a much older child, then he climbed onto Thomas's lap and settled there as if he belonged. "I like you," Samuel announced. "You smell like horses and leather and something safe." Thomas had to blink back tears. "I like you too, little man. More than you know." Over the next few days, Thomas spent every moment he could with both Sarah and Samuel. He told them stories of his life on the ranch, taught Samuel how to whittle simple animals from pieces of wood, and listened to Sarah's tales of her time with the Lakota in the evenings. When Samuel was asleep, Thomas and Sarah would lie together under the buffalo robes and talk about everything they had missed in there. 3 years apart, Sarah told him about her pregnancy, about the fear and loneliness she'd felt raising their child alone. Thomas shared his own pain, the empty years of searching and wondering and never quite giving up hope. "I used to dream about you," Sarah confessed one night. "I dreamed that you'd found us, that we were a real family, living somewhere peaceful, where nobody cared about the color of our skin or the language we spoke." "That dream doesn't have to die with you," Thomas said quietly. "I can raise Samuel that way. I can teach him that love is stronger than hate, that family is what you make." Promise me," Sarah whispered urgently. "Promise me you'll tell him about me when he's old enough. Tell him about us, about how much we loved each other." "I promise," Thomas said. "I'll tell him every day how beautiful and brave his mother was. I'll tell him how she sacrificed everything for love." On the 6th night, Sarah took a turn for the worse. Her fever spiked, and she began having trouble breathing. Thomas held her hand and spoke to her softly, telling her stories about their future together in whatever realm awaited beyond death. "I'm scared, Thomas," she admitted in the small hours before dawn, "not of dying, but of leaving you and Samuel." "We'll be okay," Thomas promised, though his own heart was breaking. "We'll take care of each other. And someday, when our time comes, we'll find you again." "Do you really believe that?" Thomas looked down at her beloved face, pale and fragile in the firelight. "I have too. A love like ours doesn't just end, Sarah. It goes on. It has to." She smiled then, a shadow of her old radiant smile. "I love you, Thomas McKenna, in this life and the next." "I love you too, Sarah McKenna," he replied, using her married name for the first time, forever. She died just as the sun was rising, slipping away so peacefully that Thomas almost didn't realize she was gone. One moment she was breathing, next she was still, her face relaxed and serene as she had simply fallen into a gentle sleep. Thomas held her for a long time as the camp awakened around them. He memorized the feel of her hand in his, the weight of her head on his shoulder, the faint scent of wildflowers that always seemed to cling to her hair. When Chief Running Bear finally came to check on them, he found Thomas still holding his daughter, tears streaming silently down his face. "She is at peace," the chief said quietly. "She lived long enough to see love triumph over fear. That is all any of us can ask for." The funeral was held that evening, and it was unlike anything Thomas had ever witnessed. The entire tribe gathered to honor Sarah's memory, sharing stories of her kindness, her wisdom, her bridge-building spirit. They spoke of her in both languages. Weaving together the two worlds she had loved, Thomas spoke last, his voice steady despite the grief threatening to overwhelm him. "Sarah taught me that love has no boundaries," he said. "She showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to love despite that fear. She gave me the greatest gift any man could ask, for a son to raise and a purpose to fulfill. I promise all of you that I will honor her memory by raising Samuel to be proud of both his heritages, by building bridges where others see only walls." That night, as the tribe settled into mourning, Chief Running Bear came to find Thomas where he sat by the dying fire. "What will you do now?" the chief asked. Thomas looked toward the lodge where Samuel was sleeping peacefully in his aunt's arms. "I want to take him home with me. I want to be his father, raise him on the ranch, teach him everything I know. But I also want him to know this world, to understand his Lakota heritage. I was hoping ... I was hoping you might allow visits, maybe spend summers here, winters with me." Running Bear was quiet for a long moment. "You would do this? Raise a half-breed child, knowing the hatred you will face?" "I would face hell itself for that boy," Thomas said without hesitation. "He's my son, mine and Sarah's." And maybe she was right. Maybe he really is meant to be a bridge between our peoples. But first, he needs to know he's loved completely by both sides of his family. The chief smiled then, the first genuine smile Thomas had seen from him. "You are a good man, Thomas McKenna. A worthy husband for my daughter and father for my grandson. But Samuel is too young for such arrangements. He needs stability, consistency. I propose something different." Thomas listened as Running Bear outlined his plan. Samuel would live with Thomas on the ranch, where he could learn the ways of the white world and receive a proper education. But every summer, he would return to the tribe for several weeks to learn the Lakota traditions and maintain his connection to his mother's people. And, Running Bear added, "You are welcome in our camp anytime. You are family now, Thomas. You have earned that right through your love for my daughter and grandson." The offer was more than Thomas had dared to hope for. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah would be so happy." "She is happy," Running Bear said with quiet conviction. "I can feel her spirit at peace. She knows her son will be loved and her memory honored." The next morning, Thomas prepared to leave the Lakota camp with Samuel. The little boy was confused and frightened by his mother's death, clinging to his aunt and crying for Sarah. Thomas's heart ached watching his son's pain, knowing there was nothing he could do to ease it except be patient and present. "Samuel," Thomas said gently, kneeling down to the boy's level, "I know you're sad about your mother. I'm sad too.
Asked
Me to take care of you, and I promised her I would. Will you come home with me? Will you let me be your family?" Samuel looked up at him with tear-filled eyes. "Will you tell me stories about her every night?" Thomas promised. "And I'll teach you to ride horses and rope cattle and read the stars. Your mother would want you to learn all those things." "Okay," Samuel whispered. "But can we visit grandfather sometimes?" "As often as you want," Thomas assured him, as their small party prepared to leave Thomas, Samuel, and an escort of a dozen warriors who would see them safely home. Chief Running Bear approached with a final gift. "This belonged to Sarah," he said, pressing a small bundle into Thomas's hands. "Her journal. She wrote in it every day, including many entries about you and Samuel. I think when he is older, he will want to read his mother's words." Thomas accepted the precious gift with reverence. Inside that journal would be Sarah's thoughts, her dreams, her love preserved forever in her own handwriting. It was a treasure beyond price. "Thank you," Thomas said, "for everything, for accepting me, for trusting me with Samuel, for giving Sarah a place where she could be herself." "She gave us far more than we gave her," Running Bear replied. "She gave us hope that two peoples might someday live as one. Take care of her son, Thomas McKenna. Raise him to be the bridge she always believed he could be." The journey home took 3 days, and with each mile, Thomas watched Samuel slowly begin to adapt to his new reality. The boy was resilient, as children often are, and by the second day, he was chattering away about everything. He sawed the way the grass moved in the wind, the shapes of clouds, the tracks of animals they passed. "Will I have my own horse?" Samuel asked, as they rode within sight of Thomas's ranch. Eventually, Thomas replied, "When you're a little bigger. But for now, you can help me take care of mine." "What about a dog?" Thomas smiled. "We'll see about getting you a dog." The homestead looked smaller than Thomas remembered, and shabbier. He saw it now through the eyes of a father, wondering if it was good enough for his son. The cabin needed repairs, the barn could use fresh paint, and the corral fence had several broken rails. But it was home, and it would be Samuel's home too. That first night, as Thomas tucked Samuel into the small bed he'd hastily constructed in the cabin's single bedroom, the boy looked up at him with serious eyes. "Are you really my father?" Samuel asked quietly. The question caught Thomas off guard. He'd been wondering when this moment would come, how he would handle it. Looking down at his son, he decided on the truth. "Yes," Thomas said simply. "I am. I loved your mother very much, and we made you together. But she had to go away before you were born, and I didn't know about you until she got sick." Samuel absorbed this information with the remarkable acceptance of childhood. "Do I look like you?" "You have my eyes," Thomas said, "and my stubborn chin. But you have your mother's smile and her kind heart. Will you teach me to be like you?" The question nearly broke Thomas's heart. "I'll teach you to be like the best. Parts of both of us," he promised. "Your mother was brave and smart and loving. Those are the most important things to be." "Okay," Samuel said sleepily. "I'm glad you're my father. I was getting tired of not having one." As Samuel drifted off to sleep, Thomas sat by his bedside and marveled at the changes 1 week had brought to his life. 7 days ago, he'd been a lonely bachelor struggling to make sense of his existence. Now, he was a widower and a father, entrusted with the most precious gift Sarah could have given him. The months that followed were challenging in ways Thomas had never imagined. Raising a 3-year-old was exhausting work, especially one who was grieving the loss of his mother and adjusting to an entirely new way of life. Samuel had nightmares, tantrums, and moments of heartbreaking sadness when he would cry for Sarah, until he made himself sick. But there were magical moments, too. The first time Samuel laughed at one of Thomas's jokes. The morning Thomas woke to find his son had crawled into bed with him during the night, small and warm and trusting. The day Samuel successfully helped Thomas deliver a calf, his face glowing with pride and accomplishment, Thomas kept his promise to Sarah, reading her journal entries aloud to Samuel in the evenings. The little boy was too young to understand most of what his mother had written, but he loved hearing her voice through her words. Thomas treasured those moments, to Sarah's thoughts and feelings preserved forever, her love for both of them evident on every page. As winter melted into spring, Thomas began to notice changes in both himself and Samuel. The boy was growing, stronger and more confident, his natural curiosity about the world blooming under Thomas's patient guidance. And Thomas was learning that love could multiply rather than divide loving. Samuel didn't diminish his love for Sarah, but somehow made it deeper and more meaningful. The real test came when Thomas took Samuel into town for supplies. He'd been dreading this moment, knowing that their appearance together would raise questions and possibly provoke hostility. Samuel looked obviously mixed race, with his dark hair and olive complexion that marked him as part Native American. Sure enough, the whispers started the moment they walked into the general store. Thomas felt the stares, heard the murmured comments about that half-breed kid and McKenna's Indian bastard. His jaw clenched with anger, but he forced himself to remain calm for Samuel's sake. The boy, thankfully, seemed oblivious to the tension. He was fascinated by the jars of penny candy and bolts of colorful fabric, chattering happily about everything he saw. "Can I help you folks?" store owner asked, his tone cool but professional. "Just need some basic supplies," Thomas replied evenly. "Flour, sugar, coffee, maybe some of that hard candy for the boy." As Thomas gathered their purchases, he overheard 2 women whispering behind him, "Shame on him, raising that savage child. No good can come of it. Mark my words, that boy will grow up to be trouble. Indian blood always shows." Thomas's hands clenched into fists, but before he could respond, a familiar voice cut through the store. I'd be careful what you say about Thomas McKenna and his son, ladies. That man is worth 10 of most folks around here. Thomas turned to see Doc Patterson, the town's elderly physician, standing in the doorway with his medical bag. The doctor had delivered half the babies in the county and treated everyone from cowboys to settlers to the occasional wounded outlaw. He was respected by all and feared by none. That boy's mother died in my arms, Doc Patterson continued, his voice carrying clearly through the store. And before she passed, she told me about the love she shared with Thomas. Real love, the kind that doesn't pay attention to skin color or social conventions. If you ask me, this town could use more of that kind of love and less of the poison you ladies seem to be spreading. The women flushed red and hurried out of the store without another word. Doc Patterson approached Thomas with a gentle smile. How are you doing, son? And how's this fine young man adjusting? We're managing, Thomas said, his voice rough with gratitude for the older man's support. Doc Patterson knelt down to Samuel's level. And what's your name, young fellow? Samuel McKenna, the boy replied proudly. My daddy is teaching.